everybody, I'm Luke Hector from the Broken Meeple, and if you like what you see, please remember to thumbs up the video and comment in the chat. And if you want to help the channel a little bit further, the Patreon campaign is always running, where you can donate a little bit of cash to keep the channel flowing, as well as get some early insight into top 10 list ideas and Q&A segments that I'm going to do in the future. So it's a beautiful sunny day outside, and I'm here recording videos. Yeah, that's kind of my life in a nutshell, really. But this is a top 10 list that, obviously, I want to do more top 10s, because let's face it, the reviews don't get a huge amount of buzz, but top 10 lists are always more fun to do. But this one is one I've wanted to do for a long time. I've had this on the plate for a good 2 months now. Now, it's not the most original list, although I would argue that the list that's going to follow this one is entirely original and no one else has done it. To my knowledge. Somebody could prove me wrong, but this is my top 10 games that have killed other games, and the reverse will be the following list, which will be top 10 games that have defended themselves from other games. And I really don't think anybody else has done that second list, but prove me wrong. I'd like to watch it if they have. But this one is essentially where a game has come out and it's been so good yet so similar to another game that's like it, that it's killed it off. Like, I will play this new game rather than this new game. And as a result, you know, this is always a very divisive topic, because you say this game kills this game, and then the people who love this game will rise up and say, no, this game's rubbish compared to the old one, the new one's not as good. And to be fair, usually I'm in the old crowd, because I tend to prefer the older, well, I'd say the older games, not cult of the old, but I don't get hyped up on the brand new hotness all the time. So when a new game comes out and people quickly say this kills another game, I'm usually like, are you sure? I don't know. And like I say, next week I think it's going to be a very interesting list, although, to be fair, it was harder to make that list than it was this one, because I think there have been more examples of games killing other games. But yeah, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts as to whether you agree with this, and there were a few on the short list. So in terms of a caveat, to whittle down my list a bit, I had to at least say, look, okay, did I at least enjoy the game at some point before? It's no good saying, oh yeah, Cluedo was killed by awkward guests. Well, yes, clearly, Awkward Guess is the better game, but who plays Cluedo? It's like, seriously, it's like Goliath stepping on David. It really doesn't seem like much of a matchup, really. So, you'll see that as we go through, but I'm certain that I'm going to get some comments on some of these, both in favour and against. So this should be quite interesting to see. But I gave a bunch of list ideas to my Patreons, and thank you to everyone who supports this channel. But I gave a load of lists and said, come up with your own ideas. But in the poll, this one and the one that's following on were clearly the top 2 voted. So, like I say, patrons have spoken. Let's get on with it.
Get on with it.
My number 10 is probably going to be one of the more divisive ones on this list. Well, other than my number 1. But this one is kind of weird, because I will pretty much never play the physical version of this game, even though I give it respect. But I haven't really played the physical version that's followed it that much lately, apart from once a few months ago. But also, an app has come out to make the old one better than the physical version of the other one, so it's kind of like weird how to tie these two up. But having technology on your side is a bit of an unfair advantage, so I still gotta put it on the list, but I thought I would stick it at 10. This is Nations. Nations is a civilization building game that, for me, killed through the ages.
We have found the witch, may we burn her!
Through the Ages, another civ building game. Very popular, higher up on the Board Game Geek rankings. Not that I give much care for that, but especially with the amount of additions it has. Seriously, sort your list out. But the idea with this is that in Through the Ages, you built up a little civilization. You got you got mines, and you got foundries and universities and libraries, and you got advisors, and you went to war with other people and that. And it was a really fun, complex game, but I hated the amount of admin and bookkeeping in it. It was ridiculous. And a 2-player game of it could go on for 3 to 4 hours. Way too long. Seriously, keep your game lengths down a bit. Now, Nations gave you the exact same feel, but I could get a 4-player game of it done in less time than it took me to do a 2-player of the Through the Ages one. So why would I play Through the Ages? Nations, granted, does not have anywhere near the aesthetic quality that Through the Ages 4th edition has. That one is gorgeous. Nations, does look vomit-inducing, but you still get advisors. You go to war with other players. You still get the buildings and the resource management. But I like the idea that you're putting the meeples on the buildings to dictate how much resource they're producing. And with the expansion dynasties, you can now get all these different player powers and different board setups. So for me, the physical version just really beat out Through the Ages. But as I said, the app for Through the Ages is one of the best app implementations that exists out there, at like top 5 easily. And honestly, it's like, well, if it takes out the bookkeeping, then maybe I'd rather play Through the Ages than Nations. It is weird, but technology is a little bit unfair. So for the physical board game aside, Nations, kill Through the Ages. My number 9 is also going to be a little bit on the controversial side because A, it's very recent, and B, some people are a little bit like, are you sure it's similar to this one? I'm not sure myself. But it's definitely one that I thought does deserve to be on the list because I have warmed up to the previous one. Like, I don't hate it anymore. I actually thought, yeah, you know what? You put a certain expansion in this game and I will play it. But when I consider the similarities between this and the recent game that I have gone goo goo gaga for, which is Ark Nova, Ark Nova does for me kill Terraforming Mars. Now, I get that the action selection mechanic has nothing to do with Terraforming Mars, and I get that the map in Terraforming Mars is communal, whereas Ark Nova isn't, but you can't deny that the card system is pretty much bang on the same. It is the idea that you have this smorgasbord of cards, that you will get so many of them in the game, but barely, anything that's like the total amount there, and you have to do the best you can, the most efficient way of getting points and that with these cards. In Terraforming Mars, you're getting resources. In Ark Nova, you're getting money and animals and setting up enclosures and sponsors. The theme is different, but it's still fundamentally all about those cards. And also, the milestones are similar as well. In Terraforming Mars, you've got the milestone things where if somebody has certain criteria met, they can go get extra points on a milestone and it's beating out other players. Hello, conservation projects in Ark Nova, anybody? It's the same system. Exactly the same. So even though there are some differences between the two, yeah, if you were going to put two in front of me, granted, Terraforming Mars is kind of more lukewarm on my system, whereas Ark Nova is like way up to 12. But still, if I was comparing the two and somebody said which one should I get for those card systems, I'd say get Ark Nova in a heartbeat. I just much prefer it. Now, I get that some people are probably sick and tired of hearing about it right now because, like Wordle, it's one of the most talked about things on social media right now when it comes to board gamers. Now, I'm not saying that everybody needs to own a copy of Ark Nova. I love it to bits. It was my favorite game from last year, and it's easily like a top 20 game for me at this point. But, not everybody needs to own this quite heavy, hard to find 2 to 3 hour game about building a zoo, okay? So don't give in to the hype too much. Go check out my review and find out more and see if it's the game for you. Now my number 8 is on the list because this one probably I would still play the old version because the old game is much quicker. You can get it done in about 8 minutes, whereas this one's going to probably take you a good 45 minutes to an hour. But the feeling of being like the odd one out in a group and being asked questions and you've got to try and lie your way out of the situation was originally done in Spyfall, and Spyfall is a really cool social deduction game, but I'm kind of burnt out on what questions you can really ask people, and it's hard to teach new players because the new player gets put on the spot and they're not comfortable with it, and it's like, ugh. Now this problem still arises in the new one, but I think the zaniness of it is just that little bit easier to get across. But even then, I roll out of my chair laughing, talking about Detective Club. Detective Club is the same deal. You are put on the spot. There is one odd one out in the group as everybody is given all these Dixit picture cards and a single word clue in secret, but one person doesn't know what the clue word is. So as the cards come out, the person who doesn't know has to come up with similar pictures to go with what's being put out, but then as soon as the clue is revealed, they've got to then backtrack and sort of bluff their way out of the situation. Same with Spyfall when they're trying to figure out what location they're at. But Detective Club, hands down. That game has me rolling out of my chair laughing every single game. It's never gone down badly for me, at least not in a group perspective. Occasionally the odd person has been a bit uncomfortable, but for most part, I'm just having a blast as everybody's coming up with the most zany reasons why their Dixit cards relate to the clue that's been said. Even if you actually know what the clue word was, your cards can still suck. It's just that much fun. I think I've done a review of this probably a couple of years ago. Definitely worth checking that out, but yeah, I think it was my number 10 in my top 100 as well. You could always check that out. But yeah, I love this game. Anything you put with the Dixit cards, I'm gonna look at, and this one for me has not made me want to care much about Spyfall. For my number 7, now I was only kind of lukewarm on the previous title, but yeah, it's another recent one from last year. And to be fair, the one that it replaced is probably only a year before. I think they've come out pretty recently, so at least since 2020. But honestly, I can't see why you would play Calico when Cascadia exists. Cascadia's infinitely the better game. The idea of putting tiles on your little tableau or board or whatever in this case, and like trying to make the best use of those tiles, put them in the right places, manage a resource, in which case, you know, you've got the cats in one, you've got the animals in the other. But in Calico, you've only got 3 to pick from. It's very chaotic how that, like, those 3 get picked. And even then, it's mostly push your luck. Because you essentially, like, hope that certain tiles are going to appear, and then they do, or they don't. And even if they do, somebody else might take them, in which case you can't really plan ahead at all. So it just kind of fell flat for me. But Cascadia, again, you have 4 to pick from, so better than 3, but you have other things that go along with them, so it's a pair, like it's 4 pairs, because you're getting the tile and an animal token. But you can mitigate those 4 if like too many of the same animal come out, you have the choice. And even then, even if the perfect setup doesn't come out for you, you should be able to make good use of something else. It never felt like that I really had the worst turn possible in Cascadia, like very rarely, compared to Calico, where I just felt like I'm taking tiles for the sake of it and everything's just going to pot. You know, cats are cute. I love cats. You know, cats are amazing. But yeah, Cascadia it's just better. It doesn't take that much longer to play Cascadia. Both of them might as well better be solo or 2-player games really than 3 or 4. But Cascadia looks just as good. It's just as good a theme, but the mechanics just work better in Cascadia. I just will not play Calico ever again when this one exists. Cascadia's on my shelf. I'm taking it tomorrow actually to Portsmouth Guild Fest. In fact, what's it called? Gamer Fest, Retro Games Fest. I'm taking Cascadia as one of the games in order to teach new gamers. I wouldn't take Calico, honestly. Now, I'm not saying Calico's a horrible game, it just didn't really sit well with me, and then as soon as Cascadia came out like less than a year later, it's just like, poof, dead. Yeah, not gonna happen. Now, for number 6, you might think, well, maybe this is a little similar to a different game that it's killing, but to be honest, it kind of works for both. But whenever I play the great little card game San Juan, why would I play Puerto Rico again? Puerto Rico was this Euro game where you were like choosing a role each round, and depending on when you picked the role, you got a bonus and other people got you know, other parts. But it was all of a case of like who picks the role and when, as you're building up a little city and trying to like, you know, do fairy chat. I forget exactly what happens in Puerto Rico, but as I say, it was, you know, a nice Euro game. But now it's got to the point where you've got Puerto Rico sharks who basically are like, oh, I'm gonna sit next to you. This guy's new, isn't he? Do you mind if I sit over there? I don't really want to be screwed over by this guy. It's like, you know, and that just sucks when that happens. But San Juan takes that feeling of building the Puerto Rico city with the whole, oh, I'm trading indigo and cocoa and, you know, coffee and stuff like that, and just dials it down to a 45-minute card game. If that, you can get it done in 30 minutes if you're really quick, but it's just super fast. I mean, why would I play Puerto Rico? Puerto Rico could take me a couple of hours or more. It could be, like I say, very bad with Puerto Rico sharks. And if you are doing badly to begin with in Puerto Rico, you're done. Like, you have no way to catch up in that game. San Juan, you can kind of pull it back, but it still retains that cool thing of, oh, I pick a role and I get a little bonus, whereas other people get other things, you know. And you could argue that this might be more similar to Race for the Galaxy than Puerto Rico, and I could certainly see the argument, but honestly, it works either way. It kills Puerto Rico for me, and honestly, I'd rather play San Juan than roll for the Galaxy. So honestly, pick whichever one of the two you think fits best, and San Juan, for me, still comes out on top. It's a great card game, doesn't get enough love anymore these days, but seriously, it's just so cool and simple, and the idea that the entire deck of cards is everything. Your currency, your hand, the buildings, the resources, everything. It's just such a cool, neat system. I'd love to see more buildings for this, or like a re-implementation of this done with something else. But for now, San Juan, still on the shelf, and I still really enjoy it. Now my number 5 is similar. Well, you might have argued that a recent review I did should already be part of this, but honestly, I recently reviewed Now or Never. I don't think Now or Never replaced Near and Far. I think Near and Far kind of held on really, but you'll have to check out my review video for more details. But originally, Near and Far totally killed Above and Below. Yes, and there are still some people who are more fans of Above and Below, which is interesting to say the least. I mean, I've got no problem with it, different strokes, but I'm curious as to why Near and Far didn't replace Above and Below for you. Because both of these games from Red Raven Games and Brian Lockett are, essentially Euro games with a story-based thing sort of woven into it. But in Near and Far, the story and the Euro game mechanics are kind of side by side 50-50. They work in great unison with each other. Whereas in Above and Below, the story aspect kind of feels a bit tacked on. You're playing the Euro game, but then occasionally you just might read a tiny little excerpt and that's about it. There was no campaign in that one, so it literally was just the single game. And honestly, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Euro game part of Above and Below either. It just seemed very basic, or there was like some very clear ways not to play the game and better ways to play it. It just didn't, it felt like it was it was the first in the trilogy, and it was like, this is a good foundation, let's iron it out a little bit, let's develop it more. And then came Near and Far, and once I had Near and Far, there was no reason to ever play Above and Below again, because Near and Far sat so much better with my group. Now or Never has not replaced Near and Far, but again, check out my review video for more details. But yeah, for me, they're similar. It's a Euro game with story-based mechanics, but Near and Far just does it a lot more smoother. There's still tension for spaces on the home board. It just felt like a sort of better theme. I liked the fact that you walked out onto this Atlas map and like did the little quests every now and again, and that was just for a traditional mode, but then you could play it in a 3-act story character campaign, or an 11-act or something like that, main campaign. So you had your choices of what to do, and even, to be honest, even the arcade mode in Near and Far I think beats out Above and Below. So yeah, this one was a clear kill, but I wasn't exactly like screaming the praises of Above and Below anyway, which is why it's not much higher. But no, I say, curious to know your thoughts if you think the other way round and you prefer Above and Below. I'd be interested to know. My number 4 is kind of a bit heartbreaking actually, because for ages I've been trying to defend whether I should have this game in my collection or not, and it still is. It's still on the shelf, on the exact same publisher's shelf. But honestly, when did I last pull out Imperial Settlers? When I got Empires in the North. And it just feels like Empires in the North has just outright killed it. Imperial Settlers is still a really great game. I've got all the factions for it. I've got all the expansions for it. And I really enjoyed my time with it. But then Empires of the North, you can tell which one I've got on the brain, came out, and it just did it a lot smoother. I've got all the expansions to Empires of the North, so I've got just about as much content. But Empires of the North is easier to play solo, and to be honest, I pretty much solely play the game solo, but it's also just quicker to get out and play. Because with Imperial Settlers, you've either got to have this massive deck of cards for each faction now, or you have to go through a deck building process in order to get it streamlined down to 30 cards. I can't be bothered with that.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
I gotta do deck building for things like the LCGs and that enough times. I don't need it in a normal standalone card game. But Empires of the North basically said, okay, you don't have to deck build. Here's your deck, and that's it. That's it. Yep, we don't add to it. We never added to it. This is your deck. This is how your faction works. Go for it. Perfect. Nice and straightforward. It's how I like to do things. Sentinels in the Multiverse does something similar. I like to have my own deck with my own character. Street Master is another perfect example. Again, my own character, my own deck. That just works better for me without having to care about deck building in advance. Not to say I don't enjoy the LCGs that I have to do that for, but it's more time, it's more hassle. And so with Empires in the North, I get just as cool a set of gameplay as Imperial Settlers did, although I would say Empires of the North, actually, I think the gameplay is better in that than Imperial Settlers, especially with the scoring system being first to get to 25 or so many rounds, as opposed to Imperial Settlers' fixed round system, which can drag on a bit. Yeah, I just haven't pulled out Imperial Settlers in ages. I don't know, it really belongs on my shelf, therefore. Especially as Empires of the North is going to have an expansion coming out, the Wrath of the Lighthouse that I talked about in my anticipated expansions video. It's just going to, stick more nails in Imperial Settlers' coffin. 51st State is now coming out with an Ultimate Edition, and like I say, Empires of the North kind of kills that for me as well. I don't know why I would have either of these two, so it may be time to say goodbye to Imperial Settlers. Like I say, Empires of the North is just that good. For my number 3, man, have I been singing the praises of this one, and I don't know how many people have actually listened to me on this, although to be fair, I don't expect you to listen to me half the time, it's just something that I've constantly been saying. There is a gateway game that is regarded as one of the best gateway games to teach new players, called Carcassonne. And I agree, it is a really good gateway game, and to be fair, I'd rather play something like, Ticket to Ride, or a few other gateway games, but Carcassonne is still a great system. It's still a great game. I prefer the standalone ones to playing the original version now, but I have been saying constantly that small islands, I think it's from Mushroom Games, I think did it before, maybe I've got that name wrong, but I think Lucky Duck Games has now brought it out. I think it kills Carcassonne. It's the same deal. Build up a map with very cute artwork, building up islands in an archipelago this time, which is infinitely more pretty than French countryside, I'm sorry, it just is. But like I say, I know French countryside is beautiful, but if you look at the artwork for Carcassonne and then look at the pretty archipelago and small islands, which one do you prefer? But here, you're building up these islands with all these symbols on them, and the idea is that in between each round, you choose an objective card which tells you, right, well, I'm going to score points for having an island with a ton of lotus flowers on it, or a ton of anchors, or something. And then what you do is that you, as a group, build up this communal map, like in Carcassonne, but you're each trying to build up islands in such a way to benefit you and not other players, but you don't know what their objectives are. So you're kind of thinking, well, this island's getting pretty big, maybe I should cap it a little bit because I wonder if you're gunning for this. But then also you need to have a spare house in order to put on the island, and there's only so many slots. The bigger the island, the more slots there are, but maybe the island's been built in such a way that there's not many slots on there. And you can only go on an island once. So you've got to pick the right time to score the most points from it. Not to mention that each player has a tile once in the game that they end the round with. So you might give that up early, and then for the rest of the game, you're kind of at the mercy of the other players when the round ends. It's a cool system, and I know it sounds complicated. I'm making it sound more complicated than it actually is. It's still a very streamlined, easy game to play, with quite a neat little solo mode in it as well, actually. But yeah, it's just I just think it beats Carcassonne out. It's got a couple of extra rules to Carcassonne, but not many. But I just think the thinkiness, the idea with those objectives, and just the overall look of the game, just as soon as I got it, I just thought, yeah, why would I want to play Carcassonne again? Not to say I won't play Carcassonne. Carcassone's still a great gateway game, but honestly, if somebody said, oh, is there a tile laying game we could play? I'd probably pull out Small Islands, which I think is in the other room actually, Small Islands first, before Carcassonne. I really do. So for my number 2, this could be a slight little bit of a cheat, because technically I've only played the prototype of it, although to be fair, it's a near finished prototype, and it's fulfilling any time now actually. I think in the next month or so it's going to fulfill to Kickstarter backers, and I'm expecting to get a full retail copy of the game, probably even deluxe version, from Alley Cat Games as a result of doing the preview video last year. But I stand by a comment that I made in that preview video, and like I say, I wasn't giving an opinion or a rating out of 10, I think I gave a first impressions rating and that was it, of 8. But this one, Eternal Palace, from Alley Cat Games, coming out soon, like next month, killed Kingsburg. Hands down. These dice placement games are a dime a dozen now. There's so many of them where you roll dice and like put them in places and do stuff with them. Well, as much as I love Alien Frontiers is a bit more complex. There's more to it. It's a little bit more meaty, and I still love it. I still much prefer it to stuff like Marco Polo and that, bleh. But the thing is, there's not really been a simple, really good gateway version of such a game, other than Kingsburg. But Kingsburg's a little bit bland, and the second edition looked horrible aesthetic-wise, and I just never really got back into it. I kind of burnt out on it. But Eternal Palace is the replacement for Kingsburg. It is the go-to gateway level, well, near gateway, if not next step, level of, like, it's an entry point for the dice placement system. So simple, sort of Chinese style film, I forget what it was, but the idea being that you get these dice and put them on edges to places to get the resources in order to build various landmarks, but also to get these little art panoramic like little pieces that you put on a little canvas in front of you and build up a picture. Now, it's a gimmick through and through, but man, am I addicted to it, constantly going, oh yeah, I like this little picture, we can put the statue there, put that hill there, we can put a little sunset there, and it's like, Luke, it's your turn. Quiet you. I get so wrapped up in that, forgetting that I'm supposed to be actually getting points. But It's just very simple, it looks beautiful, and I stand by what I said in that preview video. I just think that Kingsburg can just move on now. This one has just outright slaughtered it. You know, now, not my number one, because as I say, it hasn't really come out yet, so I thought it might be a bit unfair to put this at number one, but still, as I say, you want an entry point into dice placement mechanics, worker placement dice mechanics. I can't think of anything better than the Eternal Palace. And my number one is going to get me such flack. It's going to get me such flack. Although it's very divisive. This one has its like 50% share of like people who will agree with me and 50% people who will get their pitchforks out, literally in this case, you know, to kill me for this. And if that wasn't a clue, I don't know what is. Yeah, for me, it just stands around. I am on the side that thinks that Caverna killed Agricola. You motherfucker! And it did. And I have played Agricola once recently. I played it with a couple of friends from the Southampton group, and I did enjoy my time with it. But again, while I was playing Agricola, it was still like, I still feel restricted. I have to get people to feed and all this stuff. And you know, it just felt like I have to play it this way. Everybody's going to have a bit of everything by the end. You know, if I make one mistake, I'm screwed. I must get kids. Like, you have to get kids or you fall flat. And yeah, it took a long time. Now, I played it with Farmers on the Moor, and I admit it's better with Farmers on the Moor. But still, I'd just rather play Caverna. Caverna allows me to do what I want with the farming theme. And granted, Fields of Arle, I don't think that kills Caverna, because Fields of Arle is more of a solo thing, whereas Caverna is more of a multiplayer thing. But both of them allow me to do what I want. You know, I want to have all the sheep. Fine, let me have all the sheep. I want all the piggies? Fine, I want all the piggies. You know, I want to just do nothing but grow pumpkins. Great, I'll grow pumpkins. I'm just going to go out adventuring all day. You know what? I don't want to go into my cave. I'm going to be all outside. Or maybe I want to stay in my cave and never go outside. You know, I can do whatever I like. And it's still like an efficiency engine. You still got to build up points and beat the other players, but it's not like, oh, you didn't have this one like little bit of corn in your field. Well, it's like taking all points. Agricola is like that, and that drives me nuts. Always having to think that's like, well, I don't really feel like I want a pumpkin. So like, go, no, you must have it, and it just, it drives me nuts in that one. But not to say I hate Agricola with a passion. I give it respect. I mean, I don't respect brass anymore. I used to sort of give it a bit of respect. Now I'm just sick and tired of everybody talking about it. But Agricola, I still give respect and say, look, you know what? This is still a fine game. It's just not for me. For me, Caverna is what I wanted from a farming game, and it's given me that. Love the expansion to it with the asymmetric factions that you can make, and the idea that we're going to get this new expansion coming out later this year is now going to breathe more life into it. So yeah, I get it. If you love it, then great, you're with me. If you love Agricola and didn't like Caverna, then I can entirely see why. The arguments that they have to say that Agricola is better than Caverna makes sense. It's really just down to your personal preference, and that's the great thing about board games. But for me, my number one, Caverna slaughters Agricola, in my opinion. So there you go. I've only got about another minute and a half before this camera runs out of space on my little SD card. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed that top 10. It was an interesting one to come up with, but I'd be interested to know your thoughts in the comments. Let me know all your games that slaughtered, well, not all of them. Like, pick out one of your favorite games and tell me what game it killed. Whether you agree with disagree with one on my list or something I didn't even talk about. I want to hear your views, because I did mention things like awkward guests and stuff like that in the past. I even had a dominant species marine on the short list about replacing dominant species, but I just felt like I don't enjoy dominant species enough to really warrant it. It would have probably been my 11 or 12. And there's other little things like that, you know, like Manhattan Project Energy Empire replacing Manhattan Project, and I thought, they're a bit different. And then there's like, you know, Boom Lake replacing Maracaibo, but honestly, both of those games I've kind of burnt out on and don't really care about anymore, so what does it matter? You know, these were the 10 that I felt I could get more information on. But that's it for me. I'll see you on the next Broken Meeple video. Again, remember to please thumb up and comment and let me know your thoughts. It means the world to me. You know you appreciate the content and like the stuff I do. Until next time, you can check out some other top 10 lists I've done, including my top 10 anticipated games, and the follow-up from that, my top 10 anticipated expansions for what we're looking forward to in 2022. Take care, and remember, as always, whatever kills what, it's still only a game. Bye for now.